Welcome back to The Power Shift, a podcast about urban energy policy and climate action. My name is Grace.
And I'm Blake, and this week we'll be interviewing Anna Wells, who will be talking about her firsthand experience of energy policy while living in Seattle.
All right. Hi. Welcome, Anna. First of all, we'd like to thank you for agreeing to be on the show. We really appreciate that. And we're going to ask you some questions about Seattle and some of the ways that it's combating waste, pollution, and emissions. So to start off, as a resident there, are you aware of any specific policies that the city has regarding those issues?
Yeah, for sure. Seattle actually has a pretty strong reputation when it comes to sustainability, and a lot of that is because of some really specific policies that they've put in place in recent years. One of the biggest ones people notice is the waste system. Seattle has a mandatory composting and recycling system, which means you're not allowed to just throw away food in the trash. The city's aiming for about a 70% waste diversion rate, which is pretty ambitious but doable. And honestly, from what I've heard, it's really effective. Seattle consistently ranks among the top cities in the US for recycling and composting. On the emissions side, the city has been working hard through its version of a Green New Deal. A big focus is on buildings, so things like phasing out fossil fuels in new construction and electrifying older buildings has been a priority. The goal is to cut emissions something like 58% below 2008 levels by 2030, which is pretty aggressive. And then another big one is transportation. Seattle's trying to reduce emissions from cars by encouraging electric vehicle adoption and more transit-oriented development, basically designing the city so people don't have to rely on cars. They're aiming for an 82% reduction in passenger vehicle emissions by 2030, which is huge if they can pull it off. Another cool thing that they just did with transportation recently is open the world's first high-speed rail system on a floating bridge. We now have a light rail that goes across I-90. And then with water, it's less strict but still meaningful. They offer rebates for things like rain gardens and cisterns so people can manage stormwater better and reduce overall water use.
Okay, wow. That actually really sounds pretty solid. So do you know exactly how effective those policies have been?
Yeah, they actually seem to be working pretty well, at least compared to a lot of other cities. Seattle hit its Kyoto Protocol goal early, which was reducing emissions to 7% below 1990 levels. That's something a lot of places didn't manage to do on time. And like I mentioned, the recycling and composting system is one of the most effective in the country. A lot of that comes down to the fact that it's not optional and it's just built into daily life.
Okay. So that really seems like a good thing. Can you actually just clarify what the Kyoto Protocol is, though, really quick?
Yeah, that's a great question because it sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. The Kyoto Protocol was an international agreement where countries committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions to help fight climate change. It was adopted in 1997 and focused mainly on cutting emissions from developed countries. The specific goal people are usually referring to is to reduce emissions about 7% below 1990 levels. So, when Seattle says it met the Kyoto goal, what that means is the city managed to lower its greenhouse gas emissions to at least 7% below what they were in 1990, and it did that as early as 2008.
2008. Okay, wow. That actually sounds pretty effective, I think. Have these policies like impacted your life at all every day, or are they just like, do you even notice them? Are they disruptive?
They're definitely not disruptive, but I do notice them. On trash day, it's kind of a pain to have to drag out 3 bins instead of 1, but I don't mind doing it. It's also a big difference when it comes to just general waste. Since I lived in Montana for so long, I got out of the habit of recycling and composting and sorting my trash, and moving back, it was definitely an adjustment to go back through all that again.
Wow, okay, that's really good to know, actually. Yeah, we do stuff a little bit different here than there, I'd assume. So that's good to know. And do you think there's any like problems that you'd like to be addressed in Seattle? Is there anything that you guys are not doing there that you think needs to be addressed?
I think we could definitely be doing more to reduce emissions when it comes to public transportation. They have a lot of buses that are fully electric now, but the majority of the buses up where I live, which is a little bit north of Seattle, are still gas powered.
Wow, okay, they're all gas powered. Yeah, so is there anything else that you think should be put in place in Seattle that isn't being done as of now?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more gaps than people realize, even with how strong our system is. One of the biggest issues that there is a lot of coverage about is access and equity. A lot of these policies, like electrifying homes or switching to electric vehicles, sound great on paper, but they can be so expensive. So the city is moving in a sustainable direction, but not everyone can move with it at the same pace that everyone wants. That creates a bit of a divide where sustainability becomes easier for higher income households and harder for others. Another big problem is waste contamination. Even though composting and recycling are required, people don't always sort things correctly, myself included. When that happens, entire batches can get rejected and sent to landfills anyway, which undercuts the system's effectiveness. So the policy is strong, but human behavior doesn't always line up with it. And adding back onto the buses, transportation reality is difficult. Seattle is pushing for fewer car emissions, but the city's layout, growth, and commute patterns still make people rely on cars more than ideal. Public transportation is improving, but it's not always convenient enough to fully replace driving for everyone.
Okay. Yeah, wow, that's pretty solid. That's a lot. I bet it's pretty different like living in Montana and then going back to Seattle and having all these things like cuz we don't have any public transportation at all here in Montana. So, at least you guys have some. But that being said, do you think that Seattle is a sustainable city overall?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a more sustainable city than other cities, but I still think that it has a long way to go before it can really be called a sustainable city.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anna. We really appreciate having you on here. You're really helpful, and I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Well, that was a great interview. Thanks again, Anna, for coming on the show. We really appreciated hearing about your insight regarding the effectiveness of Seattle's energy and waste policies.
All right, thank you for tuning into our podcast. I'm Grace.
And I'm Blake.
And this is The Power Shift, a podcast about urban energy policy and climate action.